was a zombie. I wasn't myself. There's so many people with really great results after they take ADHD medication. I was not one of them. What happened next changed my life forever. I just wanted to open up about something that I've never really opened up about with ADHD medication in my childhood. And I just thought that if I shared my experience, it might bring some light to you, because a lot of people aren't really sharing what I'm about to tell you. And I will say that what happened to me is a bit more on the rarer side, but it happens a lot more than you think. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 6. My parents were going through a divorce and I was taking it really hard. I went through depression at the same stage that I was getting put on ADHD medication because I wasn't doing that great in school. I was not really doing well on my homework because I wasn't paying attention in school. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was zoning out so much that when my teachers would speak, it sounded like the voice of the adults in the Peanuts, where it was just a womp, 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 womp. And it just was very hard to pay attention. So my parents noticed this, took me to a psychiatrist. So they figured, let's test him for ADHD. I passed with flying colors. So I then was put on medication. Now, there's a lot here. I didn't know until I read this book, which I talk about in a lot of videos that are coming up. When my psychiatrist put me on medication, it didn't really do anything. And I didn't really care. I just was like taking a pill. But then nothing happened. My grades didn't shift at all. So then they put me on something different. Nothing really happened at that point. And then they put me on a stronger dose. And what happened next changed my life forever. I went from totally smiling, happy, and energetic to, and it was like I was a zombie. I felt like I wasn't myself. And this is where it really hits close to me to describe it this way. The side effects of the medication made me feel like I am so unwanted in this world that my own family and teachers would want to medicate me and numb my personality so that I don't exist. And I took that really hard. I didn't know what was happening. I was just a kid. I didn't know any of the science behind it. I didn't understand what was happening behind the curtains. But all I knew was my experience, that I felt unloved and unwanted so much that I'd have to be force-fed pills to be someone completely different. And I felt broken. My teachers would look at me and tell me that I wasn't paying attention and I didn't care. And I would just get so many horrible reactions from people that didn't understand my ADHD. And it was really hard to hear. And then I would hear that for many years of my life. And I took that as, I can't do this anymore. I got so depressed that I kept telling my mom, you don't love me. There's no way you love me. Even though she did everything she could, I took it as, but what you did numbed me. And it shows me you don't want me here. I didn't understand really what was happening. But, you know, if you have kids that are going through a hard time, they're going through a divorce right now, or they're being bullied in the school, and there's any way that they could take that they are not enough, and this happens, it doesn't end well. It got to the point where I had really hard thoughts about myself and things I wanted to do to myself. And I almost did, but I didn't. I kept saying, why me, why me, why me? I'm just trying to live my life. And I heard God tell me, why not you? I mean, if you're so far gone, you have nothing to lose. You might as well try to be something better. Anything you can do to make an influence, positive influence on the world. So I started reaching out to people going through depression and just lifting them up and being there for them while I was going through depression. And that's how I ended up becoming a coach because I just ended up loving it so much. But here's what I didn't know until I started reading more on it and researching. And honestly, I just read this book. It's kind of dense, but it did give me a lot of closure. So for my entire life up to very recently, I thought ADHD medication was bad and it'll make you numb and it's just not worth it. There's so many people with really great results after they take ADHD medication. I was not one of them. I did a little better in school with focus, but at what cost? I lost myself in the process, and I, for years, struggled to find out who I really was again. And I had social anxiety for many years because I made up this thought from the things that had happened, from parents divorcing that I blamed myself for, that had nothing really to do with me, to being put on medication that numbed my personality. It was just kind of this perfect storm that seemed like it was legit, but it wasn't. But as a kid, you don't really think that way. You don't really understand. You just have your experience and you think that's what's real because it's real to you. But here's what I found that gave me closure, that made me more open to seeing ADHD medication as an option. Whenever you're prescribed ADHD medication by a doctor, they put you on a methylphenidate, like Ritalin, for example. It's always been the go-to. It's been tested for a long, long time. It was used during World War II to help soldiers stay awake, and basically helps kids nowadays to focus in school, which is just interesting. It goes from warriors to children. If the methylphenidate doesn't work, they put you on an amphetamine. 50% of kids that take medication for ADHD do well with amphetamines. The other half do well with methylphenidates, but it just comes down to what works best for them. And doctors usually just go with methylphenidates because they've been tested longer. If those don't work, they'll try different doses, and they'll gradually increase. That's called titration, which is where you start low on a dose and then you increase to a specific goal. And something clicked in me after reading this book. I think that they didn't apply titration. They didn't increase slowly. I think they just ramped it up, or something happened where the dose was just too high, because side effects for medication for ADHD don't really show often, except for a few little things. It just really affected me. And this is what's important if you're a parent of an ADHD child, is I was afraid to speak up, and I didn't think my parents really cared to hear how I felt about it. Even though you usually kind of need to know, you have to track how the child is doing and talk to them about it. But I just thought, I'm going to get in trouble if I don't tell them it's working. So I think it's really important to just talk to your kids and ask them if medication is okay with them. Be their partner in the trenches with them. Don't just expect results, because they may be taking it extremely differently. And like I said, a lot of this stuff is kind of rare. Like, this doesn't really happen often, but it does happen. Another thing that happened to me was that I got Tourette's. And I thought that was because I was so stressed from the divorce of my parents and the fact that I was being bullied in the school and just going through such a hard time. But this is more evidence that my psychiatrist put me on too high a dose of ADHD medication, because that can be a side effect of some medications for ADHD, but usually only if you already have Tourette's or if you're taking too high a dose. And I didn't already have Tourette's. I would kind of just tick like this. What's wrong with me? As if I'm not getting bullied enough in school, I have to have this now where everyone's staring at me. It was so embarrassing. It was really the worst time of my life. Here's what I wish I could have heard from my current self as a kid. I wish that I could have just looked him in the eye and just said, hey, I know you might feel pressured to tell me everything's working, but I really like to hear how you're feeling. The second thing I'd do is I would actually look into an ADHD coach that has ADHD and a therapist that has ADHD. There's a lot more options than there was when I was a kid. And I would look into a therapist that really knows about ADHD, because the truth is a lot of therapists aren't really taught much on it. I've coached therapists and they've told me that they don't really know much about it. There's not really much on it. So right now, the leading voices on how to get through it and be productive are people with ADHD that have gone through as much as possible and come out on top. I hear this almost every time I get a new client. I hear the thing that really makes me feel comforted and believe in myself is knowing that you have ADHD too. It's knowing that I can relate to you, that you know what I'm thinking, that you know what's going to happen if I do certain things and how to get around it, and you know how I feel. You relate to me. As people with ADHD, we don't really feel related to. It's more like X-Men. I feel like a mutant. And I've always loved X-Men because of that, because you fit into society just as a normal person because you look the same as everyone else. But in reality, you have these super abilities that you just don't know how to control. And it's like the beginning of every superhero movie where they have these huge powers that are really amazing. They can do incredible things, but you have zero control over it. Like none, no control. And you're just hurting other people around you with your poor time management and procrastinating and not focusing on what they're saying and being present. But then once you finally get it together, it's like a superpower. In fact, it's the reason you do really well. And all the people I've met that are on top of their ADHD, very well off in a lot of ways because they have learned to use their ADHD to their advantage. Because habits are so incredibly, enormously effective. Habits make up 90% of our day. So if you can find ADHD habits that work for you, you can change 90% of your life. And I tested this, and that's what got me into being an ADHD coach. I don't have a perfect life at all, but what got me to be so much more highly effective and intentional and disciplined and strategic was habits. And I did all of this without medication. So if I could talk to my past self before he started medication, I'd say, hey, let's go through productivity coaching from an ADHD coach, from someone who's been where you're going and has done all the things you've done and come out on top. And they can tell you how to get there. I don't know how that wouldn't work, but if that doesn't work, try medication. But like I said, I'm not a doctor, and you definitely should listen to your doctor and your therapist. This is just what I would have told my past self. Like and subscribe to this video if you thought it was really helpful, and I'd really like to hear your comments below of where you're at in your ADHD journey and what your thoughts are on ADHD medication.